Hello and welcome to Archipelago at the Movies, where each episode we dive deep into a movie about museums and try to understand what it says about the museum landscape. And for this episode, we're reviewing 2004's National Treasure. And I'm thrilled to be joined by my friend and colleague, Rebecca Reebsteen. Rebecca, welcome to the program.
Thank you for having me, Ian. I'm happy to be on this side of the episode.
Yeah, Rebecca helps me so much in the show Museum Archipelago, and I'm thrilled that she's here.
Oh, I'm happy to be here. It's super fun. I love this new program that you're doing. It's such a great idea.
Thank you. Mm-hmm. Well, it turns out that there are a lot of museum movies that need to be critiqued.
They need to be. No one's been doing it.
No one's been doing it.
I don't know why.
No one has been approaching it from a museum point of view.
It's a shame. Really lacking.
Is there anything, Rebecca, you want to say about your work and what you do, or do you want to gloss over that?
I guess I can say it. I mean, it's not that different from maybe Ian's perspective in your last episode, but you don't often have people on your show who are coming at things from a film maker and film lover's perspective. So I'm definitely coming into this kind of going back to the way that I would review a film when I was in school, and it was like a film theory class. So I'm kind of doing this as if we're doing museum film theory.
Oh, that's so exciting, and cool. exactly what I love to talk about. And I'm not qualified to do. But you, on the other hand, are qualified to do it. So
I hope so, yeah. I'm going to try.
It's really exciting to have you here. Let's talk about your history with 2004's National Treasure.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Do you remember the first time you came across the movie or the first time you watched it?
I do, actually. And I honestly thought it was like one of the most epic stories I'd ever seen. I totally loved it. I latched onto it, for sure. I think it was one of those things where the Da Vinci Code obviously also had been out at that point, but I was too young for that. So I couldn't, it was like Da Vinci Code light is what I would maybe categorize it as, like, you know, an experience,
yeah.
I would say. So that feeling of like you're being tuned into this conspiracy that
is right under our noses.
Right. And is like, oh, plausibly true. You know, like we don't know everything about what the founding fathers were doing. It's possible that there's a map on the back of the Declaration of Independence. Who's seen it? Only Nicolas Cage. So we don't know. But, you know.
That's excellent.
Yeah, it was really fun. I remembered really liking it. I mean, I don't know how it holds up now. I haven't seen it probably in 10 years at least. And definitely not like outside the context of the last 40 minutes on TV. So it'll be really fun.
This will be fun. This will be fun.
See it in full. Well, the first thing that we see in this movie is a young Nick Cage, character name Ben Gates?
Yes.
That's his name? Okay,
Benjamin Franklin Gates.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, right. That's not a joke. That's actually the character's name. Benjamin Franklin Gates, as a young lad, is walking through his grandfather's attic with a flashlight, very, you know, Hardy Boys-esque, and he seems to know where he's going. He's looking for this really beautiful, old-looking book. And we don't get to see what's inside it because as soon as he sort of picks it up and blows the dust off of it, his grandfather comes in and falls.
Grandpa!
You're not supposed to be up here.
I just wanted to know.
You should know the story. Okay, here we go. It was 1832.
And basically what we learn is that there's this family history surrounding this myth about this supposed hidden treasure that their great-great-grandfather
was the stable boy of the oldest remaining survivor of the signers of the Declaration of Independence.
Right.
I guess I learned in this movie that there were 53.
Yeah, I had no idea. I thought it was a lot fewer.
And of that pool of 53, this guy was the oldest.
Mm-hmm.
And on the night that he died, passed on this secret to this stable boy. And now this grandfather is doing the same thing with his grandson.
Yes.
Jump cut.
Jump cut to adult Benjamin Franklin Gates.
As Nicolas Cage.
As Nicolas Cage. And he is on an expedition in an unidentified Arctic region. And he is searching for the clue that we were told about in the grandfather's telling of this epic family history.
He's assembled a crack team. He's got all sorts of people working with him. He's convinced people to invest in him. And this party of people is going to, and they found this ship where the secret is.
The first secret.
The first secret.
It's a clue. Let me see that.
No, wait, don't break it.
We're one step closer to the treasure, gentlemen.
Ben, I thought you said that the treasure would be on the Charlotte.
No, the secret lies with Charlotte. I said it could be here.
And the gold, it turns out, isn't on the ship, but another clue is.
Right. Which to me is very exciting. I wrote in my notes, which I've been taking through this, that if I were Nick Cage's character, I'd be having a lot of fun in this moment.
Yeah.
Before the shootout and before the betrayal, when he's sitting there trying to figure out what the riddle is, because what we find out is that the clue is not even a straightforward clue. It's another riddle he has to figure out. I was like, wow, that's really fun.
Yeah.
If this is your life, and this is what you've been doing all this time, it must feel great to be like, wow, my knowledge is going somewhere.
I think he's having fun. You know, he's pacing around. He's like, he's thinking about the clue. He's thinking about the poem or that they found.
Timothy Matlack was the official scribe of the Continental Congress. Calligrapher, not writer. And to make sure he could not offend the map, it was put on the back of a resolution that he transcribed. A resolution that 55 men signed. The Declaration of Independence. Oh.
But the other members of the crew, there's some mixed allegiances going on.
Right. It shows this really clear distinction between Ben Gates as a treasure hunter who's doing it for this passion about the historical artifact and this respect for this long-running, historical, cultural treasure. But then we see that juxtaposed with the Ian character, not the Ian who's sitting next to me now, but the evil one in the movie, who seems very into it for the money.
Yeah.
And I think that's really the main distinction between the two of them throughout the rest of the movie, is that, Ben Gates has these higher passions that are tied into something much larger than just literal gold and treasure.
We'll have to arrange a way to examine it.
This is one of the most important documents in history. They're not just going to let us waltz in there and run chemical tests on it.
And what do you propose we do?
I don't know.
We could borrow it.
Steal it? I don't think so.
We see this cool scene talking about the security of the actual document in the National Archives.
When the Declaration is on display, it is surrounded by guards and video monitors and little families from Iowa and little kids on their 8th grade field trip. And beneath an inch of bulletproof glass is an army of sensors and heat monitors that will go off if someone gets too close with a high fever. Now, when it's not on display, it is lowered into a 4-foot thick, concrete, steel-plated vault.
I find myself wondering, is this all real?
Even if that was completely accurate, which I kind of suspect it probably wasn't, it's definitely different now.
It just seems like, what are the chances that something goes wrong with the mechanism that brings it back? What are the chances that, some mechanical or electrical failure happens such that the document is just ripped by the machinery.
Likely. It's very true.
But that sets up the height sequence because it's not just 2 places where the document is. It's actually 3 places because
Nick Cage knows the truth about these artifacts and that there are people who love and protect them and are doing all of this background work to keep it, preserved. So he knows about the preservation room that a lot of people probably don't know about. So shout out to all of the people who are working in the preservation rooms of every archive everywhere. You're doing so much work, not getting credit for it.
I love that because it matches his character.
Yeah, right.
He is that type of person, so he knows that that it would be in a third location.
Now, when the case needs work, they take it out of the vault, directly across the hall, and into the preservation room. The best time for us or Ian to steal it would be during the gala this weekend, when the guards are distracted by the VIPs upstairs. But we'll make our way to the preservation room, where there's much less security.
I think the movie does an interesting job now of having these 2 competing teams, Nicolas Cage and his sidekick, and then Ian and his thugs.
Who is also Sean Bean, if we want to have some distinction between you, Ian,
That's
the
right.
Ian that was on the show last week, and now this Ian in this movie.
If it's an Ian doing a bad thing, then it's not me.
It's not you.
Thank you.
But Sean Bean versus Nicolas Cage is essentially what we have.
Yeah, and it has all of the wonderful things about a heist movie it's just such a clean way to tell a story because everyone's motivations are clear. Like they both want the same thing. They both, as we've already discussed, do different things to get to it. I love heist movies for this reason because it's like clear what's going on, but it also makes us as the audience feel like, well, maybe it's okay that Nicolas Cage is stealing the Declaration of Independence because he knows that someone else is stealing the Declaration of Independence, and I'd prefer it to be the good guys than the bad guys, which I think helps because otherwise it'd be like, no, leave this to the FBI.
It's true.
An appeal to authority.
Yeah. Well, we were saying this in the first 5 minutes when the first idea is floated about stealing this document. We were both surprised that Nicolas Cage's character is actually not the one who wants to do it, and that the idea comes from Sean Bean saying, well, this is obviously the next thing that we have to do. And at first, Nicolas Cage is kind of like, well, I don't want to desecrate this monument. I'm using that term for the Declaration of Independence because I think it applies here. Yeah. I don't want to desecrate this thing, even though I have this huge lifelong familial history desire to see this thing through. I'm not going to go so far as to do that until someone who doesn't respect it is threatening it.
Yeah.
So it is a very righteous reason for going and doing this thing that is definitely not a good thing to do.
And they even have the appeal to authority before the whole plan gets underway. Ben Gates and his sidekick get an interview with the director of the National Archives to warn her that someone is about to steal the document. But the problem is nobody believes them. Well, that's not their only problem.
Yeah, so this is very 2004, early, trying to have a woman in the cast attempt. So it's pretty cringeworthy. I mean, the nerdy computer sidekick guy is like, oh, well, what are we going to say? I don't even know the line, but he says something that essentially refers to the director that they're about to meet as a guy, a man, and then they walk in and they see this stunningly beautiful blonde woman in the director's desk. And he says, oh, well, that's a very cute man. And it's a really painful moment.
Yeah, it's really bad.
Neither of us enjoyed that. And it's pretty, it's really too bad that they're walking up to this person who's likely the premier historian, in this place.
It's the National Archives.
Yeah, it's the National Archives. They're walking in on the director of the National Archives, and they say, oh, she's a cute girl.
Yeah.
So that's too bad. But we're going to move past that because something that I actually do really like about the character, separate from this initial introduction of her, is how much of a absolute nerd she is. And we see that because, the first thing that Ben points out about her office is this incomplete collection of George Washington inaugural pins. She has all but one. And so that comes into play because later, to get on her good side, Nick Cage sends her his one miraculous pin that he has that completes her set. And when she sees him later, she says, usually I'm not allowed to accept gifts, but I really wanted this.
Yeah.
So I'm keeping it. And so we see, okay, she really just loves this stuff. Like, she's really into it. And I think that's a good thing to have in a character, especially if you've already sort of degraded her by making the first thing that we see about her and think about her is that, oh, she's actually a pretty woman instead of an old man that we expected, to sort of buffer that and say, okay, no, but she really does care.
Right.
Which leads us to believe that when eventually she is clued into everything going on and is going to have to work with them, she's in it for the same reasons that Ben Gates is in it.
Yeah. So then the competing heists happen during a fancy gala, with Ben barely making it out alive with the real Declaration of Independence.
Are you still there? Ben.
I'm in the elevator. Ian's here. There was a shooting.
I hate that guy.
I really, really loved the gift shop scene. So basically, this is so iconic. It's so iconic. I'm surprised that I don't remember this from my vague watching of the movie. But Nicolas Cage is in a tux, and he has the actual Declaration of Independence rolled up in a plastic bag.
Right.
And one of the employees says,
Are you trying to steal that?
Oh,
It's $35.
for this?
Yeah.
It's a lot.
Hey, I don't make the prices.
but he looks at the souvenir life-size Declaration of Independence copies.
Rolled up the exact same way.
And he is like, oh, yeah, sorry, And he
Slipped my mind.
yeah, slipped my mind. Like, I guess the implication is like he's a white guy in a tux at a gala. Like
Right.
everything's fine, and he pays for it, and it's just fantastic. It's just, I don't know, for some reason, like that little bit of tension coming after this whole enormous heist scene
Right.
that's like still kind of in progress is just excellent.
Yeah, and it's like right when he's about to leave the building.
Yeah.
So it's like,
so tense.
You made it this far and the gift shop girl is going to catch you. Like, that's great.
It's precarious, but Ben and Abigail, who is slowly joining the team, and sidekick Riley escape with the Declaration. But they know they're being followed by the FBI because Ben used his credit card to pay for the Declaration in the gift shop. They drive to Philadelphia because the next clue has led them to the Franklin Institute. There, they hire a school kid to collect clues for them undetected. I'm still trying to figure out what the movie is trying to tell us about museum visitors. We actually got quite a number of shots of museum visitors, both at the National Archive. There are people sort of leaning over the glass and investigating.
Right.
And at the sites in Philadelphia.
We see a bunch of different types of visitors, but the most common visitor that we see in all of the scenes, except for the gala, are school kids.
That's a
students.
really good point.
Yeah, and there's actually a really significant, scene with a student museum goer who the Nick Cage and co. have paid to look at these clues that are behind a glass that they can't get to because they're going to be recognized. And, this kid is inconspicuously just doing his school research while all of this is going on. And nobody notices because he's exactly the person who's supposed to be in the space at the time.
Yeah.
The next clue they suspect has to do with the Liberty Bell. So they're in Philadelphia and they've gotten these special X-ray glasses that Benjamin Franklin invented. And they're going to once again reveal a different clue on the Declaration of Independence. And so they're running and they have to do it real fast. And they do it in, I guess, the room that is in part of this another museum that they're in.
which is Independence Hall. Yeah, and it's that same room. It's the room where it was signed, and he's like, the last time this document was in this room, it was being signed.
Right.
And yeah, that was really something. And it was also interesting from the museum point of view that the next tour was right around the corner.
Yeah.
And they even say that, right?
Yeah.
Like it was just after a tour left and now a new tour is coming in.
Yeah.
As you would, like that is what that room, if that room was sentient, it would hear the same speech over and over and over again. Another museum we visited was the USS Intrepid museum ship, which the company that Rebecca and I work for actually did work for.
Amazing.
Yeah. It's a museum ship that's docked in Manhattan, and it features a lot of airplanes and now a space shuttle. And it strikes me as so Manhattan because there's no room to store planes on that island.
Right.
So the only thing you can do is like pull up a ship and make it a museum ship.
Yeah.
But this is where the FBI uses Nicolas Cage's bait for the evil Ian, and things go awry. After that, the movie really starts to go off the rails, with the stakes getting higher and higher. But our heroes do manage to simultaneously outsmart the Ian who's trying to kill them, and then, finally, find the treasure. Let's talk about the provenance of where all this stuff comes from.
Yeah, well, I mean, in the very beginning, that's like the setup for the treasure is that it's not actually anything that any American has collected. It's something that the Crusaders found underneath the Temple of Solomon, which I don't know if there's an actual physical place where that is, but it's definitely not Europe. It's definitely not America. So we start off with the treasure already being this stolen thing.
Right.
And the imagery that they use throughout in that scene and then at the end when we finally see the treasure room is very heavily Egyptian.
Yeah.
Because we see the sarcophagi, we see literally a statue of Osiris, we see all of this stuff that definitely denotes like ancient culture. And it's interesting, you know, we were saying, this isn't even their treasure that they're looking for. This is not yours.
Right.
And I was not expecting it to ultimately, in the end, have Ben Gates say, well, we got to send this to the Smithsonian, we got to send it to the Louvre, the Cairo Museum.
Give it to the people. Divide it amongst the Smithsonian, the Louvre, the Cairo Museum. There's thousands of years of world history down there, and it belongs to the world and everybody in it.
Yeah.
And that was pretty good.
That was pretty good.
I was happy to see that.
It's so interesting the way that museums play throughout the movie, like the role that they play.
Yeah.
That even the FBI agent is acknowledging that the whole point of the government, the U.S. type of government, and the whole point of the treasure is that no one person is allowed to have it all. And the way that treasure is for the people is in museums. Like that is, like museums are the only way we know how to like give that to everybody. And we can go into how problematic that is, how it's not really for everybody, and how it's also a very good way to show the power of the state, however you want to show that. But it's just this really interesting interplay.
It is interesting what people designate as being something that's too valuable to belong to someone, which goes to what we were just saying in the last moment of the film where, you know, there's this funny exchange about how you only got 1% of the of the ultimate treasure value as the finder's fee, and we're supposed to believe that's a tiny amount, but then we see obviously that's like likely millions and millions of dollars. But the reason that Nick Cage's character didn't take 10% is because that's too much.
Yeah.
And so it's interesting that there are some things that are too valuable, whether or not that's actual monetary value or something like the Declaration of Independence that's just too valuable. It's for any one person to own, and it has to be a public possession.
Right.
They want us in Cairo next week for the opening of the exhibit. They're sending a private jet.
That's fun.
Yeah, big whoop. Could have had a whole fleet of private jets. 10%, Ben. They offered you 10%, you turn it down.
Riley, we've been over this. It was too much. I couldn't accept.
And that kind of ties in nicely with that scene. There's this scene where Abigail is holding on to Nicolas Cage's arm, and the Declaration of Independence is also falling.
Right.
And there's this decision, and the movie is like presenting this interesting in the way that movies do. Like all of a sudden, out of the blue, it's like, who is more valuable?
Right.
This person who Nicolas Cage just kissed.
Right. Which is its own terrible
We can get into
moment.
that in
We'll
a
talk
second.
about-
Or the Declaration of Independence. And the movie does what a lot of movies do, which is like, actually, we don't need to answer this question because we can just make the hero do both. Like, hooray! Well, that was easy. Like, I didn't have to deal with that. But it seems to me so clear that what's great about the Declaration of Independence is that it's not as valuable as a human life. The ideas inside it are important. It might as well be a digital file, right? Like it can be copied a million times, and it's the ideas that are important. And the great thing about ideas is that they can spread. So like we don't, like there's nothing about that to keep. Like it would be nice to keep it if at all possible.
Right.
But if the choice is that or anybody getting hurt,
Yeah.
who cares?
Yeah.
There's copies in the gift shop.
Yeah. For $35.
For $35.
Yeah.
Which adjusted for inflation.
It's probably more now, but
Yeah.
you know. I mean, that leads to a really interesting and good point about the way that things gain value by being put behind a glass. I mean, if you think about any museum, going back to your last movie that you guys were analyzing, like a museum of natural history, and this is in no way belittling the incredible nature of like an archaeological find. Like all of those things are valuable for the knowledge they can give us, but the actual artifacts often, I mean, think about it. It's usually something like broken pottery. That in and of itself is not a valuable item. What you learn from it is valuable. Same as what you're saying. The ideas inside the Declaration of Independence are valuable. The paper is not necessarily valuable. The pottery is not necessarily valuable. But when you put it behind a glass and then someone comes up to the glass and threatens to move it, then suddenly it's like, how could you possibly endanger this thing that is so valuable that needs to be locked away? For whatever reason, we've decided it's important.
Like, if it wasn't priceless, then it wouldn't need to be protected. So if I see the protection, I know it's priceless. And if I don't, then who cares? The founding document of Bulgaria was signed on a desk. The Bulgarian constitution was signed on a desk. And that desk is sitting in the National Museum of Military History.
Wow.
I took a tour of it with the director of the museum for this podcast, and she showed me the desk, and it really looks like it's just part of the furniture of the exhibit room rather than being exhibited furniture. And she said people just like put their purses on it and like lean on it and sit on it and like put their kids up on it. And it's like because it's not, it doesn't look protected.
Yeah, and there's no glass
There's
around
no glass
it.
around it. There's no even a like rope around it. It's just a table.
Wow. Well, you know what's weird? What strikes me actually is my reaction as you said that. I felt like, how could someone do that?
Yeah.
But at the same, I mean, you're right. It's a desk.
It's a desk, right? Like you would, I think there's one level of like going into the museum. Maybe if it was the first thing you saw in a museum, because of that context switch of going outside, you wouldn't do it. But once you haven't been reminded of that context switch, it's over. So I take your point very well.
Yeah. I mean, all of these things, value is arbitrary. It completely depends on the people who are valuing it and the people who are in power and deciding what has value and what other people should therefore respect. That's all to say that curators and people who are setting up these exhibits in whatever format we're talking, whether it's like an exhibit that we think about in, I think, the most common understanding versus something like, the Liberty Bell, like a monument. However it is that it's being set up, the people who are setting it up are making these conscious decisions that these are things we as a society should care about and respect. Yeah.
And then there's the other sort of I don't know if you used the word historiography earlier.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
At the very end, Nicolas Cage is talking about his house, and it's played for laughs. Like, oh, I like this house because in 18-something...
I chose this estate because in 1812, Charles Carroll met...
someone that did something in history and had fun. It's great. Wonderful.
Riley, like rolls his eyes as that.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And of course, it's like, well... Actually, you might now be the most famous person who lives in this house.
Yeah. Well, it just goes to show that, these things are constantly shifting and changing. And again, depending on who is going to look back at that in 100 years, what remains is what people then remember things by.
And I don't know if the movie is trying to make a point about that. It doesn't seem to be making a point one way or the other about. You could easily characterize... I feel like there was very little characterization of Nicolas Cage.
Yeah.
He could have been like someone who's always living in the past. That would have been an easy characterization to make of his character. There was almost nothing.
Yeah.
It was very, very remarkable. I'm used to like every character gets like one or two character moments as we see them. Like in the last movie, it was like, okay, this guy can't pay for parking tickets and he's kind of a sad dad. Yeah. None of that with Nicolas Cage. It's just what you see is what you get.
Yeah, I mean, I think that is the nature of obsession, which is, I think, a real theme in this in this movie, and I think also in this field. I think a lot of people who work in history and the many, many tendrils that are related to museum work, even what we're doing here on the media side of it, I think you do have to have a level of obsession with something that you're doing. Whether it's you are an archaeologist and you are completely dedicated to finding out everything you can about an era or a culture that's lost, or you are a tech manager and you're so interested in finding the best possible way to convey your information with the best possible tools. I think that resides in all of us. But I think it is very particular to this sort of historical journey that we see here in the movie played out in a very fictionalized way. But I want to relate it back to, the stuff that I was doing when I was in college, and I was a regular old history major going into the archives of my, school's collections. And the feeling of walking into a dusty old room and finding a box that no one has looked at in who knows how long, and opening it up and finding this one paper that's going to tell you something that no one else has figured out before. That drive to find that thing, I think, is in everyone who is searching for something in whatever field it is, in history or museum studies or whatever it is. And I think it just relates to this because there is this element of search and discovery that is specific to being a historian. Yeah. And that we see in this movie played out in a really literal way. There is a mystery that needs to be solved, and there are clues that need to be found. But that is exactly the same thing that people who are going on an archaeological dig are feeling. It's the same thing that I felt pulling out, someone's old letters that really didn't have to do with anything larger than just these people's personal correspondences, but I became obsessed with them. We become these adventurers, and we become these mystery solvers who will do absolutely anything to flesh out the story and uncover it and put it up on display for other people to see.
It's so interesting that the domain knowledge, they never research they never go to the library. When they are in the library, it's only to find floor plans and like things about contemporary building.
Right.
That's contemporary building. It's not to find the like domain knowledge, which both Abigail and Gates share. It happens to be that Gates is usually the quickest, but everyone else is right there with him.
Right.
And it's kind of it's kind of interesting. It's very nerd in that regard.
Yeah.
And there is a certain type of nerd I'm used to sort of the Hermione presentation, which is like, it's not that I know this. It's that I know I can find this, and I'm going to be back in 2 hours after I go to the library, and then now I found it.
Right.
Now I found the information, and that like is a real like wonderful trust. Like it's a type of but that's not what was on display in this movie. And maybe it was just for plot reasons so that they didn't spend every other scene in the library.
Right. But I think it's interesting that you bring up that difference in the way that we're presented with the different type of nerd.
Different nerds.
That you can see. Because I did notice that all of the characters have some sort of really specialized interest and obsessive knowledge of something that plays into, you know, a major moment in the story where now they're able to uncover this because they've been spending however many years studying this thing. So the moment that sticks out to me is when they have the declaration and Nick Cage is about to just squeeze lemon juice all over it. And Abigail is like, hold up. I'm trained for this. I know how to handle antique documents. I mean, like, this is the moment that she's been waiting for her whole entire life.
Right.
And here she is presented, she gets to do it. Right. And I mean, even someone like Evil Ian, his specialized interest is, I guess, pulling off heists. And he does a great job at it. You know, so everybody has this
and getting
thing.
other people to kill for him.
Exactly. He's really good at his job. He's got this specialized obsessive interest, and it pays off. And so the same can be said for, you know, Gates. Like in the very beginning when he's working out the riddle and everything. At first I was writing down like, that seems unrealistic that he'd be able to make all these mental leaps. But then I thought, you know, if he's been thinking about this only for the last 20 or 30 years, however old he's supposed to be, then his brain is going to go there.
Yeah.
And he's going to make these connections that other people won't see.
And it's good to show that right at the beginning because now we've established the pattern that like these next clues aren't going to be as easy for him to solve, but he's going to do the same thing. He's going to pace around and there's going to be a couple dead ends, but he's eventually going to get it.
Abigail, I mean, it's just so sad because I feel like if this movie were made nowadays, she could have been such a more fleshed out, badass character. And it's unfortunate that she actually doesn't get relegated to the love interest for as much as maybe I was expecting. But the moments that they do, they just like, I mean, they're very frustrating because they really do relegate her to a pretty woman who is haphazardly involved and likely only there because Ben Gates likes her, rather than what we've just been discussing she is, which is the trained professional in the room and the director of the National Archives and someone who likely knows more about all of this than anyone else. So it's upsetting. The part that I hated the most was towards the end when they're walking through the cavern towards the treasure. They haven't found it yet. They haven't even found the dead end yet. And on the walk down, very randomly, Nick Cage just kind of grabs her and says, "Come here," and kisses her. And it's a very awkward moment. It's not supposed to be awkward, but we both really cringed. Physically felt very uncomfortable.
And then there was that scene right after, this is earlier in the movie, it's right after they're escaping the National Archive, where he's telling her to shut up.
Oh, my God,
because he needs to think. He needs to hear himself think.
Mm-hmm. And the whole scene is pretty much him just saying, stop talking. And that becomes a callback joke later where she's...
It's a real knee slapper.
Yeah,
it's a real
so funny. The woman can't shut up. Haha. Even though, once again, she's the expert. Whatever.
And it's just so particularly crazy because this is not that... Nicolas Cage is not that type of character.
Mm-hmm.
And it's very telling, I think, to a more modern audience that he apologized for raising his voice to Computer Boy, but he did not apologize to Abigail at all.
Right, not at all.
Not at all for doing much more than just raising his voice.
Yeah.
And again, it's like, I assume that modern movies, at every stage in the process, there's like checks to make sure that kind of thing doesn't happen.
You would think. You would think and you would hope, but it is better though nowadays. You are right. But yeah, I mean, it is too bad that no one saw this and thought, maybe we shouldn't belittle this, the only female character in the entire movie. I mean, there's one FBI agent who's a woman, but I was also
Maybe she was driving a helicopter?
Yeah, she was in the helicopter. I think she had 2 spoken lines that I recognized. Oh, the woman is speaking.
One of them was through a bullhorn, right?
I think so, or like a walkie-talkie. It was when she was on the helicopter.
Yeah,
right?
she was like bullhorning to the other helicopter that this was protected airspace.
Right, exactly. Yeah. So great moment, strong, powerful woman. But it's upsetting that that's the one moment.
Sir, we've got some traffic incoming. Looks like a sightseeing helicopter.
Unit 2, get an eyeball on that chopper.
Agent Michaels, get FAA flight plans and authorization records on that craft.
What was presented here was like a deliberate scavenger hunt. But what history is like a scavenger hunt that nobody intended.
Yeah, there's no map.
There's no map, and there's no higher power leaving the clues. But from our own interest in sort of family history, we know that this thing leads to that thing, which leads to this thing, which might necessitate a trip to mom's house to to ask her some questions or to look at some documents before going back to et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Right, absolutely. I mean, I think we create and we recreate so many of our favorite moments in movies and TV and everything in our real lives as best we can. And I think it's probably not a stretch to say that a lot of people who are in the field of, museum work and history, historical research, probably watched these movies. Indiana Jones, if that's your era, National Treasure, if that's your era. I'm sure it influences in some way. It's exciting. It makes these things that are often not considered, a sexy profession to mainstream audiences, make it seem really cool.
Yeah.
And so I think, power to these movies for giving it a good spin. That's not what it's like, but it's fun, and it's fun to fantasize that we are all Nick Cage or Indiana Jones going through our own jungles and tombs and finding out the truths of the universe.
What a movie.
Wow, yeah, that was a wild ride.
That was really something. I really enjoyed it.
Me too. I don't think I enjoyed it as much as my 12-year-old self did, but I still had fun.
Yeah, it was a really fun movie.
Yeah, this was really great. I'm really happy we did this.
Awesome. Thank you so much. This has been Archipelago at the Movies, National Treasure. Thanks so much for being a member of Club Archipelago.